There's a specific kind of silence that happens when a room full of people realizes they've been playing themselves the whole time. I've only heard it twice in my life. The first time was in a briefing room 11 years ago. The second time was at my own dinner table 3 weeks ago, when a man named Frank Delgado set down his fork, looked dead at my husband, and said, "Hold up, you don't know who she is?" My name is Renee Castillo. I spent 9 years in the Army, 4 of them doing work I still can't fully talk about, and for the last 2 years, I'd been letting my husband tell people I did some paperwork overseas. I let him say it at barbecues. I let him say it to his coworkers. I let him say it, once, to my own father, while I sat there nursing a glass of lemonade like it was the only thing keeping me glued to my chair. I let him say it because I loved him, and because some things are easier to swallow than to unpack in front of a crowd. That stopped being true the night Frank Delgado sat down at our table. By the time any of this went down, I'd been out of the Army for 3 years. I worked as a logistics coordinator for a medical supply company in Ohio, a solid 9 to 5, the kind of job where the biggest fire drill of the week was a shipment of surgical gloves stuck in a snowstorm in Indianapolis. I drove a gray Honda with a cracked windshield I kept saying I'd fix next paycheck. I made a killer pot of chili. My life, on paper, looked mad ordinary. My husband Danny sold commercial insurance. He was funny, in that way that makes people vibe with him instantly. The kind of funny that kills at parties and hits different when you're the punchline. We've been married 4 years. In the beginning, I told myself his jokes about my service were just Danny being Danny, some insecurity working itself out that I didn't fully get. He'd never served. His dad had, and from what I could piece together, that relationship left some scars I never got the full receipts on. I told myself his jokes were armor, not aim. "She was in supply chain," he'd say when people asked what I did in the military, flashing that little smile like he was winding up a punchline. "Renee counted boots. Very important work. Somebody's got to count the boots." I'd laugh along. That's the part that still gets me, honestly. I laughed along, every single time. Because the alternative was explaining stuff I legally wasn't allowed to touch, and choosing silence over honesty had become such a habit I'd stopped clocking it. My sister Denise noticed, though. Denise doesn't let anything slide, ever, which is either her best trait or the whole reason she's been divorced twice, depending who you ask. "You really gonna let him keep doing that?" she asked me once over coffee, after Danny dropped the boot counting bit at her birthday dinner in front of 12 people. "It's not that deep, Den." "Girl, it's exactly that deep," she said. "You spent 4 years doing something you can't even tell your own sister about, and you're out here letting him turn it into a bit." I didn't have a comeback for that. I still don't, honestly, except that the version of me who came home from my last deployment wasn't trying to be seen too closely. Flying under the radar doesn't ask anything of you. It lets you disappear into a normal life with a cracked windshield and a chili recipe. And some days, that's exactly what I wanted, to just blend in. The real wound underneath all of it wasn't even about Danny. It was about 4 years of my life that wrapped up with a debrief, a handshake, a folder that got sealed shut, and then nothing. No parade. No way to explain myself to anybody. Just a woman getting off a plane in Ohio, hugging her mom, and stepping back into a world that had zero clue what she'd carried home. I came back to dead silence, and over time I built my whole life around it. Danny's jokes just moved into a room I'd already cleared out. The dinner was Danny's idea. He'd landed a new client, a logistics contractor named Frank Delgado, and Danny wanted to seal the deal over food instead of a boardroom. "Big account," he told me. "Guy's ex-military too, so you two can nerd out." He said nerd out, the way you'd talk about someone's stamp collection. Polite, but not really invested. I didn't think twice about it. I made a brisket, I put out the good napkins. Frank rolled up at 7 with a bottle of wine and a handshake that told me right away he'd spent years being trained to clock people. The grip, the eye contact, that half-second read before he even opens his mouth. Prior service does that to you. I recognized it because I've got the same tell. Dinner started off smooth. Danny was in full salesman mode, cracking jokes, working the room, even though the room was 3 people at a table. Then, somewhere between the brisket and the second bottle of wine, Frank hit me with the question everybody asks eventually. Danny said you served too. What'd you do out there? And Danny jumped in and answered for me. He always did. Supply chain stuff, Danny said, waving it off like he was swatting a fly. She kept the boots counted, not exactly kicking down doors. He laughed. Frank did not. I felt the whole vibe of the room shift before I even understood why. Frank set his fork down, not slammed, just deliberate. The way you set something down when you need both hands free for what's about to happen. What unit? Frank said, not a question, a pop quiz. I told him, gave him the watered-down version, the one I'd handed 100 people at 100 dinners, all the real edges sanded off. Frank stared at me for a beat too long. Then he dropped the line that ended the evening I thought I was having and kicked off the one I actually got. Renee Castillo, he said slow, like he was pulling a name out of a file in his head. Wait, you're that Castillo? The ground didn't just shift, it opened up. What do you mean, that Castillo? Danny said, laughing, but it was that nervous laugh you do when you're checking if the room's still laughing with you. Frank didn't answer him right away, still locked eyes on me. You don't talk about it, he said, also not a question. Can't, I said. Most of it I'm legally not allowed to. She counts boots, Danny said again, weaker this time, like a guy repeating a bit after it already bombed once. Frank turned to him, and for the first time all night, his voice lost all its politeness. Danny, bro, I need you to hear me right now. I did 14 years as a SEAL. I've sat in rooms with people who plan operations for a living, and I've heard her name, her real name, dropped in a debrief in a way that shut a room full of grown men up. She's not out here counting boots. I don't know what story you two have been telling yourselves, but it's not true. Not even close. Danny's face did something I'd never once seen it do. It just emptied out. I wish I could tell you I felt vindicated in that moment. Mostly, I felt exposed. That specific kind of naked you feel when something private gets said out loud in a room you didn't pick. I'd spent 2 years building a version of my past small enough for Danny to be comfortable standing next to. Frank just torched the whole thing with one sentence, and I was not ready for how it would feel standing in the ashes. Renee, Danny said. And for a second, I actually thought he might ask me something real. Instead, he said, "Why didn't you correct me? This whole time?" That was the false hope. That was the moment I let myself believe maybe this was him finally waking up, instead of him just scrambling to cover his own embarrassment. Because you never asked in a way that made room for a real answer, I said. You asked in front of people, as a bit. There's a difference between asking someone something and using them as a punchline. Denise wasn't at that dinner, but she'd texted me earlier that day, random stuff about our mom's birthday, and in the chaos right after Frank spoke, I ducked into the kitchen and fired off one line. You were right. She hit me back with a call at 11 that night, after Frank had left and Danny had gone dead quiet in the living room. Spill. Everything, she said. I can't tell you everything. That's the whole problem, Den. I've spent my whole marriage not being able to tell anybody everything, and somehow that turned into Danny thinking there was nothing to tell in the first place. That's not on you, Denise said. That's on him for never once wondering why the silence was so loud. I didn't wonder because I didn't want to feel small next to it, Danny said. His voice cracked hard on the word small. My dad came back from his service and made every room about what he survived. I swore I'd never marry someone who did that to people. So when you didn't talk about it, I told myself it wasn't that deep. Easier than admitting I was scared of what it'd mean about me if it actually was. I sat with that a minute. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, and it still didn't fix a thing. Because understanding a wound doesn't erase the years someone spent joking to protect it. You made me small at dinner tables for 2 years straight, Danny. In front of my sister, in front of your coworkers, in front of my own dad. You didn't do that because you were scared. You did it because it was easy. And you never once stopped to ask if it was costing me something. That's the moment the internal switch flipped. The moment I decided something about myself I hadn't fully owned until Frank's call cracked it open. I was done shrinking so somebody else could feel tall next to me. I didn't decide to walk out that night, but I decided I was never again letting silence get mistaken for smallness, mine or anybody's. I need you to actually see me, I said. Not the version you're comfortable with, not the punchline. If you can't do that, I don't think I can keep doing this. The line I said next still sits in my chest every time I think about that night. I didn't survive what I survived just to come home and make myself small for a man who never once asked what it cost me. Danny didn't say a word for a long minute. That silence, unlike every other one before it, was the first one in years that actually felt real. The real showdown didn't go down in our kitchen. It happened 2 weeks later, at a company dinner Danny asked me to come to. The contract signing dinner with Frank Delgado, the one that could make or break Danny's whole year. I almost bailed. Denise told me to go anyway. Not for him, she said, for you. Let them see the real version of you for once. At the dinner, in front of Frank, in front of Danny's boss, in front of a whole table of people who'd heard the boot counting bit more than once over the years, Frank raised his glass before the contract was even signed. "Before we get into business," Frank said, "I gotta say something, 'cause it's been sitting wrong with me. A few weeks back, I found out this woman right here has been introduced to me more than once as somebody who counted boots overseas. I'm not gonna give details, can't, and she wouldn't want me to anyway. But I'll say this. In 14 years as a SEAL, I've met a handful of people whose names get dropped in rooms where the stakes are life and death, and it's always said with real weight behind it. Hers is one of them. And I think it's worth saying, right here in front of everybody, that the joke stops tonight." The table went dead silent. That specific silence, the one I'd only heard twice before in my life. Danny's boss looked at Danny. Danny looked at me. And for the first time in our whole marriage, in front of people whose opinion actually mattered to his career, Danny didn't crack a joke to smooth it over. "He's right," Danny said, voice actually shaking. "I've spent 2 years making my wife smaller than she is because it was easier than sitting with how much bigger she actually is than me in that part of her life. That's on me. I'm sorry, Renee. Not for the table. For you." I didn't cry. Promised myself I wasn't giving this moment tears it hadn't earned yet. But something in my chest that had been clenched for 2 years finally let go. That specific relief of being seen right, finally, in a room I didn't have to fight for. Frank's toast landed exactly the way overdue truth lands. Quietly savage and completely undeniable. The contract got signed. Frank shook Danny's hand, then mine, and said low, just to me, "Hope I didn't overstep back there." "You didn't," I said. "You just said the thing that needed saying." Danny didn't magically turn into some new man overnight movie style. He went quiet on the drive home and stayed quiet the next few days. He didn't crack a single joke about my service again, not one, not even a small one. But he also didn't suddenly turn into a guy asking deep questions over dinner. Real change doesn't move that fast, and I'd stopped expecting it to. What actually caught me off guard in the days after wasn't relief. It was grief. I grieved the 2 years I spent making myself small, the family dinners I laughed through, the version of me that figured disappearing was safer than being fully known. Getting seen didn't erase what it cost. Not being seen sooner. One tiny detail told me the world had genuinely shifted, though. About a week later, my dad called Danny directly, something he basically never does, just to say Denise told him what happened at that dinner, and that he was proud of how Danny handled it once it was staring him in the face. Danny told me about that call with his voice cracking all over again, and this time I knew it wasn't for show. It was a man realizing, maybe for the first time, what it actually costs the people around you when you choose not to know something on purpose. We're still married. Want to say that straight up, because this isn't a story about an ending, it's a story about a correction. Danny and I go to counseling now, every other Tuesday, some strip mall office with bad lighting and a therapist who asks way better questions than either of us used to ask each other. We're not fixed. Not sure fixed is even a real thing two people become. But we're honest now in a way we never used to be, and that's gotta count for something. I told my sister the whole story, finally, over coffee. Same table where she first called me out. "So what actually changed?" she asked. "For real, I mean." "I stopped waiting around for somebody to see me on their own," I said. "Stopped making it easy to sleep on me. Still can't tell you what I did over there, but I don't let people turn it into a bit anymore. Not even him." "Good," Denise said. "That's 4 years too late, but good." There's a framed photo on our mantle now, right next to the wedding pics, of me in uniform, taken the week before I came home for good. Used to live in a box in the closet with that redacted letter. Danny put it up there himself, no ask, no prompt. Neither of us has said much about it. It just sits there now, in the light, the way it should have all along. I think about Frank's toast sometimes, how one real sentence, dropped at the right moment, can undo years of small, comfortable lies. Not because the sentence itself was some big flex, it was just a fact, stated plain. But because for 2 years, I let a comfortable silence do the work honesty should have been doing the whole time. If there's somebody in your life you've made small so you could feel taller standing next to them, or somebody who's let you fade into the background because it was easier than actually getting to know what you carry, I'd ask you to sit with how long you're willing to let that silence keep doing the talking. Some of us don't get a Navy SEAL at our dinner table to say the true thing out loud for us. Sometimes you just gotta be the one who finally says it yourself.